Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Augustine Choi, Dean of Weill Cornell Medicine, and I'm pleased to present the latest installment in our Weill Cornell Medicine Insights webinar series. As many of you know, Insights brings you lively and interactive discussions with distinguished Weill Cornell faculty members who are experts in a range of important topics during these extraordinary times. Our goal with this series is to stay connected with you at a time when that is more important than ever, as well as to engage and inform. Today's webinar is Healthy at Home, Building Strength, Nutrition, and Resilience. Your Weill Cornell faculty panelists are Dr. Jaspal Singh and registered dietitian and nutritionist Janet Lau. Your moderator is Dr. Joel Stein, chairman of the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine. Thank you very much again for joining us today. We appreciate your time, your support, and all you do for Weill Cornell Medicine. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stein to get things started.
On behalf of Weill Cornell Medicine, I am pleased to welcome you to Healthy at Home, Building Strength, Nutrition, and Resilience, the latest webinar in our Weill Cornell Medicine Insights series. I am Dr. Joel Stein, Chairman of the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine and Professor of Rehabilitation Medicine. We are joined today by two panelists, Dr. Jaspal Singh, Director of Interventional Spine in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine, co-director of the Weill Cornell Center for Comprehensive Spine Care, and Vice Chairman and Associate Professor of Clinical Rehabilitation Medicine in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine. We're also joined by Janet Lau, who is a nutritionist in the Integrative Health and Wellbeing Center at Weill Cornell Medicine. As we all know, the past 7 months have presented us with unique challenges in many ways, including getting enough exercise and sticking to a healthy eating plan. How do we stay in good physical shape and make sure that we're getting the optimal diet and nutrients to stay healthy at home? Today, we're going to talk about overall health and wellness strategies, including eating right, getting enough sleep, reducing stress, and maintaining your strength and endurance. We'll also talk about preventing injuries while exercising, and what to do if you pull a muscle or throw out your back while you're at home. For today's webinar, we'll begin with a panel discussion for about 40 minutes. We will then open the floor for you to ask questions. So please write them down and be prepared to submit them to us via the chat feature, which will turn on when it's time for the Q&A. Let's start with the basics. We know that now more than ever, it is important to maintain wellness. Tell me how you each define what wellness is and what its most important elements are when our lives are so disrupted. We also want to know how you, our attendees, define wellness, as that also will help shape our discussion today. Ricky?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before I talk about what wellness means to me and the other panelists, I wanted to get a sense of what you, the audience members, thought about wellness. So in order to do so, I wanted to ask 2 poll questions just to get a sense of where we are as a group, what our interests are, and what our opinions are regarding these 2 topics. So the first of these questions is, let me pull that up. Which of these 4 health habits are the most important to you in maintaining a healthy lifestyle? So I'll repeat that question again. Which of these 4 habits are the most important to you in maintaining a healthy lifestyle? Number 1, proper diet. Number 2, quality sleep. Number 3, sufficient exercise and physical activity. Or number 4, stress and anxiety management. So I'll give everyone 15 seconds or so to choose their responses. And while you're answering it, I'll kind of give you my sense of what I believe is wellness. Wellness to me is not a state. It is an actual activity. You have to practice healthy habits on a more regular basis to maintain wellness. So that could be physical wellness, that could be mental wellness, it could be spiritual. But the most important thing is that it's not static, and it requires an active work so that you're not just surviving, you're actually thriving. And that's where we at Weill Cornell think about health and wellness. So as these responses are coming in, all right, let me share these responses with you. If you could end the poll, please. So most of the group thinks that sufficient exercise and physical activity are the most important thing in maintaining a healthy lifestyle. I am glad that most of you responded as such, because that is what we specialize in physical medicine and rehabilitation, is mobility. So we'll go into those questions in a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to ask one more question, especially as it pertains to what we're dealing with in this pandemic. You know, certainly the way we stay healthy has been upended, exercise regimens, eating schedules, and things like that. So the question I have for you is, prior to COVID, where did you get most of your exercise? Where did you find yourselves being the most active? Was it in gyms and studios and classes? Did you spend most of your time doing outdoor activities such as walking, hiking, biking, things like that? If you had access to a swimming pool, was that your primary form of exercise? Or did you primarily exercise at home, doing home exercise? I'll give you a few more seconds to answer this. And for me personally, I am a home exercise person. I never really took to the gyms and classes. I know there's a sense of camaraderie and things like that, but I found that with my body weight and Isaac Newton's gravity, I could achieve most of what I needed to achieve. All right, so let's end this poll and I'll share the responses again. So most of you guys kind of agree, gyms and studios and classes. You know, many people who live in New York or even at home have access to gyms in their buildings. But I'm really encouraged to see that many of you participated in outdoor activities, such as walking, biking, and hiking. So we'll get more into what we think is a beneficial exercise regimen, but I'll hand it back to Joel to keep the panel running.
Thank you, Ricky. You know, this reminds me a lot of my own situation where I am a gym goer and my gym's been closed. So I've been struggling to figure out how to maintain my fitness and activity levels despite the pandemic. What are the strategies that we can advise people to do? And you know, not everybody has exercise equipment in their home. Some people don't have room for it, or they don't want to be stuck with a big machine they don't know what to do with when the pandemic ends. So what would you advise people in terms of maintaining their exercise activities despite the inavailability of gyms and the like?
You know, I think the most important thing that we need to focus on are things that we can control rather than things we cannot control. You know, when this pandemic first started back in March, I mean, perhaps I was naive. I thought, yeah, we're going to do this for 6 weeks or 2-3 months and we're going to be done. And we joke about, you know, the freshman 15, when you went to college, you went away from your parents, you gained 15 pounds, and the COVID-15 or the COVID-19 is no difference. We all kind of put on weight initially in March and April when we were quarantined and social distancing. And once we realized that, hey, this pandemic is not ending soon, we really need to get our routines back in order. I think that's when people started thinking about how to be creative at home, especially in New York when gyms hadn't opened yet. You know, gyms just opened a few weeks ago. So in the wellness realm, you know, I think diet and exercise are the most important two things. I'm really happy that our co-presenter, Janet's here with us to talk about diet strategies. But exercise is something that we can control. And there are many things you can do at home, whether it's body resistance activities, whether it's some aerobic exercise, just marching in place or doing jumping jacks, keeping up with your kids or grandkids. I mean, there's so many things that you can change in your day-to-day activity to maintain a healthy lifestyle. You know, one of the things that we say in physical medicine and rehabilitation is mobility is medicine. And just moving a little bit more than you were previously will have a positive impact on your body. And we're going to talk a little bit more about certain strategies, but I think living an active lifestyle is very, very critical, especially when our routines are disrupted, like in the current state.
Thank you for that. You know, I wonder, you highlighted in the poll a bit the outdoor activities, and is walking adequate? Is that the best exercise? Should people be doing strength training? Is it important to be lifting weights or getting exercise bands to do stretching exercises at home? What types of exercise should people be pursuing?
Yeah, these are great questions. You know, initially, again, when the pandemic first started, we were scared to go outside. I was scared to go outside. Certainly, we were in the hospital and trying to work on the front lines. It really depends on your fitness level. If your fitness level at baseline is kind of to do nothing and you're sitting on the couch a lot and inactive, then yes, walking is a step in the right direction. If your baseline routine is to walk, you commute via walking, then that's not enough to actually get cardio or aerobic fitness. And you might want to do something a little more strenuous. So the two rules of thumb that we use, especially by the American Heart Association and the American College of Sports Medicine, is 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week. What's beautiful about that recommendation is that moderate intensity is different for everyone. It could be walking 3 blocks. That could be moderate intense for you. If you're a high-level athlete, then your moderate intensity could be sprinting or riding a bike or swimming or doing things with much more intensity. But the recommendation is 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise. You can break that into 2 75-minute segments, or most people do 5 30-minute segments. What I try to tell people is you are exercising at an intensity where you can't really have a conversation with someone. So if you're walking in a group, you can have a couple words per sentence where you're out of breath. If you're having a casual conversation, you're probably not moving fast enough. In that realm, there's 2 big groups of exercise, aerobic and anaerobic. And aerobic exercise is what we like to call cardio. You know, that's cardiovascular work where you're exercising your heart, you're exercising your lungs. And cardio means you are either walking or hiking or biking, anything where you're increasing your heart rate. The benefits of cardio are known through the data. You can lose weight, you can increase your immune system, you can control your blood pressure, it can improve your quality of sleep. Anaerobic, on the other hand, is short bursts of activities such as jumping jacks or going up a flight of stairs or doing some resistance exercises like Joel mentioned, getting some resistance bands and working on the muscles. The benefit of anaerobic exercise is to strengthen your bones and strengthen your muscles. And these are also very important in maintaining mobility, because what's beautiful about the human body is that we can rebuild muscles and we can rebuild muscles forever. And that's why doing a combination of anaerobic and aerobic would be better to achieve a healthy lifestyle.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful advice. And I think I have a better handle on certainly what I should be doing during my exercise program. But let's talk for a minute about work. You know, we're all here on another teleconference, a video conference. I feel like this is how I spend my days, much of my days when I'm not seeing patients. And most of us are experiencing some consequences of that. Things are hurting, our necks are hurting, we have headaches, eye strain. Our wrist may be bothering us from spending too much time on the computer. How can we work in a better way at home to have the proper ergonomics in terms of positioning our computers? Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to folks to try and avoid getting some of these new maladies that are Zoom related?
Right. Yeah, we probably need a new diagnosis of Zoom or webinar related pathologies. You know, when cell phones first came out, there was a phenomenon called text thumb and text neck. And even video gamers' thumbs, where kids play a lot of video games. So we'll see in the next 6 months to a year if there are new pathologies and diagnoses related to Zoom-related calls. You know, what I found when we kind of reopened clinic in June was a lot of patients were complaining of upper back and neck pain. You know, we blamed it on the mattress or the pillows or sleep. And what we find is that it's really not related to what happens at night. Your neck pain is really related to what you're doing during the day. Mm. And most of us don't have access to a home office. You know, we have a coffee table, we have a couch, we have a bed. So what we saw was many people are using their coffee table as their desk, which required their monitor to be much lower than it should be. They're hunched over, their shoulders are forward, their elbows and wrists are not in the prime position, and they developed a lot of upper back and neck strain. So the rule of thumb, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a recommendation, is number one, to get a chair that's comfortable where your feet are flat and your hips and knees are about 90 degrees. Once you have that, the next step is to put your keyboard in a certain position where your elbows and wrists are at neutral. So if your elbows are very flexed and your wrists are very flexed, this is not going to be ergonomic. But if my elbows at 90 and my wrists are kind of flat, you're going to be optimized to prevent, nerve compressions, carpal tunnel, and tendinopathies and things like that. And finally, it's the monitor location. So what we like to see is the monitor, the top of the monitor is about 2 inches above your eyesight. So even when I'm looking at this monitor currently, my eyesight is about 2 inches below the top of the monitor. Again, these are just quick ergonomic tips. That being said, you shouldn't sit in front of a computer for hours at a time. You can stand up and change your position every 30 minutes or so, decompress your spine, stretch out your upper back, stretch out your pecs. That's going to probably lead you to not developing overuse injuries. Quick tips that you can probably implement if you have a dining table or even on your couch. But I would recommend trying to avoid putting your monitor or laptop in your lap or on the coffee table.
Sounds like really good advice, and I'm thinking I may need to reposition mine right now, but we'll finish the seminar first. So what about managing the stress of it all and getting good sleep? You know, this is a stressful time for a lot of people. They're worried about getting sick. They're missing family members. Sometimes they have family members who are ill. And their routines are disrupted. They're at their home sometimes all day long. And so the normal routines of leaving and coming back and sort of getting ready for bed, those aren't there. People can't sometimes, if they're working or they're at home, it seems seamless, the transition from one to the other and then often back. How do you recommend that people address the stress of the current circumstances? And also, how do they help themselves sleep well? What are the strategies that can help with that?
You know, stress is a tricky thing, you know, because a little bit of stress is actually not bad for you. You know, your body responds in small doses of stress. You might work harder for a moment. You might focus. It could even improve your performance. The challenge is when stress becomes incessant and chronic stress. And what happens with chronic stress, your body has then chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation in the body can lead to many, many different pathologies. It can cause cardiovascular disease. It can increase your blood pressure. Your muscles can get chronically inflamed and tense, which is why most of us hold our stress up in our shoulders. We get tight in this place. So this concept of mindfulness and stress management, you know, it's foreign to me. We say be more mindful. It doesn't really mean anything unless you know what to do as an activity. And just like any other physical activity, like running or biking or swimming, being mindful requires practice. It's not just a light switch where you say, okay, I'm getting stressed, let me be more mindful. It actually requires some insight on where you are, what is your external stressor, how do you turn that off momentarily to focus on maybe nothing or something more important. And the challenge with stress is if you are chronically stressed and aroused, if your inflammation is at a certain level, it does impact your ability to get quality sleep. You know, we talk about how many hours of sleep people get, and everyone's number is a little bit different. It could be 3 hours, it could be 7 or 10 hours. But really what we're looking at is quality sleep, deep REM sleep, where you're actually having dreams. And if you don't remember the last time you had a dream, you're probably not getting good quality sleep. So tips that we talk about, you know, we have the Center for Integrative and Wellbeing here at Weill Cornell, New York Presbyterian. There are strategies where you can kind of detach yourself from external stressors, from work. There are apps that you can listen to that take you to a different place just to, you know, with breathing exercises. All these things can lower your respiratory rate, lower your blood pressure and heart rate, and allowing you to manage your stress a little bit better. You know, again, I'm not perfect at it. I think we all need a little bit of practice. But these are just some strategies on how to be more mindful, decrease the stress in your life, and thereby get better quality sleep.
Great, thank you for those suggestions. I think we all are trying to find our way through this and figure out the best ways to deal with, again, different stresses maybe than we're accustomed to. Janet, I'd like to talk a little bit about nutrition. Many people, as Ricky mentioned, have reported gaining weight over the last several months. And it's very tempting when you're missing some of the usual pleasures in life to look in the cabinet and maybe grab something that's not so good for you. What do you suggest as the best way for us to maintain our weight or even lose weight and keep it off? How should we approach that?
Thanks, Joel. So that's a good question. And I often get those questions. So I find a good eating structure to be really important. Being well hydrated, staying active, as well as sleeping well and making sure you get in good self-care. So to zoom in on that, eating well means a good eating structure. So what I usually like to state to patients is basically you want to know how to eat. It's when to eat, it's what to eat, and how much of that to eat, with including hydration and activity. And that's quite long-winded, but that's pretty much a good strategy in order to maintain or lose weight.
That sounds like very sensible advice. Can you maybe dive into that a little deeper? I mean, when you say what to eat, obviously we all think about, trying to eat the right things, and I have my own notions of what those might be. But again, sometimes we're, spending a little less time at the grocery store these days. We're ordering things online. Those Oreos look awful good. So what do you suggest to people in terms of what they should eat? And can you talk a little bit about the My Plate plan? Has that as a strategy perhaps of how to organize your meals?
Absolutely, Joe. I always refer to the My Plate diagram with referring to how to eat. So basically, it's a tool provided by the USDA, and it basically has the plate segmented in a quarter of a protein, a quarter of starch, and half the plate as a vegetable. So I usually reference that in order to understand a complete plate that has all the macronutrients that you need. So as far as protein goes, it's typically a lean protein, and you would just simply look at the palm side of your hand. And typically for women, it's about 3 to 5 ounces. For men, around 4 to 6 ounces. Lean at that, preferably. For the starch goes, it's whole grain, and then you also want to think about, for females, it's a fistful. So usually around 6 to 8 ounces, and for men, it's about a fistful and a half to 2, depending on their activity level. I would say typically 8 to 10 ounces or 10 to 12, depending. And for the vegetable portion, it's half the plate. So dark greens are favorable here. And then you would embellish it with other colorful vegetables and just drizzle some vinaigrette for flavor. So that's a typical hot plate, but of course, with any stew, salad, soup, or sandwich, you still want to see all those macronutrients in that in your meal.
That sounds very helpful. Mealtime, of course, is a major part of this, but there's always the times in between meals. And I have to say that when I am spending time working from home, the kitchen is never far away, and there are a variety of snacks there. So is snacking inherently a bad thing, or can it be good? Are there healthy snacks? And if so, what are they?
So I think the question is more so, when is a snack substantiated, and what does a snack entail? So usually I like to mention that I like to focus more on complete meals. I think too much emphasis is on snacking. So we want to make sure we eat complete meals. But if you have, in my approach, a 5 to 7 hour gap between meals, yes, absolutely. At 5 or 6 hours, it's optional to have a snack. Something light would be ideal. Something like maybe an apple and nut butter, maybe a few energy bites, maybe even a hot beverage will do it. But at 6 or 7 hours of a gap between your meals, you want to have something more like a more substantial snack. So any, for example, typical breakfast, like an oatmeal, an overnight oats, or maybe a yogurt parfait would make sense, maybe at a lesser amount than what you would have as a meal, but that's encompassing a complete plate, you could say.
Great, thank you. Let's get back to those Oreos for a minute. So you can see I have a certain obsession there, but how do people avoid eating emotionally, sort of eating to make themselves feel better, dealing with stress, being frustrated? What do you suggest people do to avoid that?
Yeah, it's hard these days. What I would suggest is, one, make an appointment with me. We do nutrition Zoom meets bi-weekly, so that might provide some tips in that. Two, integrative health and well-being is a wonderful practice. I work amongst an amazing group of staff and teammates, and they do great work with support with self-care and healing. So my second thing is, go with the structure, how to eat, when to eat, what to eat, and how much to eat. That will be very helpful in managing cravings, because I find usually with large gaps of meals, people usually dip in energy and then they want to go for something with fast energy. So they're looking for those Oreos at that point. Secondly, you can have a hot, warm tea. Self-care is really important, so make sure that's inserted. But, otherwise, those are typical go-tos for emotional eating.
What about some of the maybe less sort of core parts of our diet, things like coffee, wine, the most important food group in my diagram, which is chocolate. These things are now perhaps, at fingers, you can reach them at any time. You don't have to go make any special effort. They're right nearby. And certainly I think some people have reported, for example, drinking more during this time, and certainly coffee to stay alert when you're on these long Zoom meetings is not surprising. Should we be staying away from these things, or is there a way to use them in moderation that makes sense? What about these sort of, extras, not part of the core diet?
I'm a big fan of honoring quality of life. I think they're important to include, especially, to enjoy. But I think it really depends person to person. So typically 1 to 2 cups of coffee is, it's fine. However, if you find yourself with digestive issues or you can't go to sleep, getting poor quality of sleep, then I would adjust that coffee ration, whether it's decaf or reducing it, for example. Same with alcohol. If 1 for females and 2 for men is pretty standard. However, again, if you're finding, some, discomfort, bodily discomfort or something, it's not keeping you sharp, it's something to adjust. Chocolate is also one of my favorites. I find the darker, the better. So 70% is ideal to get that medicinal property in. And also because the darker it is, the more bitter. So you end up not wanting more than 1 or 2 or 3 squares.
Speak for yourself, but okay, I'll take that. Let's talk about calorie counting. Many people try and keep track of their calories, and then some people also try and account for what they're using up in exercise, if they spend some time doing aerobic exercise in particular. Is this a strategy that makes sense? Should we be all trying to keep track of these things, or is that sort of just maybe not a useful way, and maybe we should focus on other ways of making sure we eat the right amount?
I get that question a lot. And what I like to say is I like to move away from calories. I think it's really important to start connecting with the food and the way you have your relationship with them. So, I think we're a little too fixated on calories, because you could easily say a bag of pretzels versus an open-faced sandwich. But, of course, the open-faced sandwich is a little bit more calorically dense and therefore nourishing. So you won't end up eating more than that one, versus a bag of pretzels where you might eat a whole bag. So I think it's really following the structure that's really important. And then I believe that when you understand the structure, you'll find that portion sizes can shrink if you're eating the right foods at scheduled times of the day, and weight loss is inevitable.
Great. Thank you. I think that sounds like sound advice. A lot of people ask me about supplements. I get this in my practice, and I'm sure you hear a lot about this. Can you comment on those?
I think supplements are fine for and used as it's supposed to, a supplement to a well-balanced plate. So especially if you have any deficiencies in your, vitamin or mineral panel, that makes sense. For example, vitamin D, it's getting cold. So typically people have low vitamin D this time of year. So that makes sense, but we want to aim to get our nutrients from whole foods.
Thank you. I think that sounds like good advice. Certainly it's how I try and do my eating. I try and make sure that I'm getting my nutrients from the foods I eat rather than from a bottle. Okay. One last question, and that's about young children. Many of the people on this call have young children at home. I know Ricky has some young kids. And it's not so easy in the best of times to make sure that children are eating healthful foods. They don't always gravitate in those directions. It certainly hasn't gotten any easier now. So do you have any suggestions about how to help with children's eating habits?
Sure. I do also have children, so I do know the challenge of making sure they eat their vegetables. But I think as parents, we need to be role models to make sure that we also eat our vegetables. And secondly, I want to make sure that my kids also have their vegetables. A lot of times when kids don't have their vegetables, they grow up to be adults that don't eat vegetables as well. So, it's really just planting the seed and making sure, they don't have to have a bowl, but kind of getting acclimated to having a little bit on their plate. And, for all meals, maybe not for breakfast, of course, unless it's savory. But otherwise it's, I always make sure that they at least have 5 bites. And there are some creative ways that you can go about that, whether it's putting their vegetables in the soup where they're, kind of varied flavors. I usually tell my kids, have your vegetables with the same bite as maybe your starch and protein so that there's other flavors and maybe disguises the flavor of the vegetables if they don't like it. And I also try to rotate and keep the vegetables varied because, it's really just making sure that they have a little bit and they're acclimated. I think because we're home more and we're able to cook more, it's really important that we influence them in that way. It would be different if they were in school where they're amongst their peers and maybe, they don't want to eat their veggies. But now that they're at home, we can definitely make sure that they have some.
It's great. It could be a real learning opportunity, a teachable moment, perhaps, now that you've got them away from their friends who are bringing the potato chips. So
absolutely.
Let's try and focus on that. So I want to switch gears here a little bit and talk about people who have either had injuries or illness during these difficult times. Let's talk a little bit about people who have had COVID and are recovering. Many people who have experienced this illness talk about prolonged weakness. They may have difficulty with their breathing, and they may have difficulty returning to their exercise programs, even after they're through the acute illness. How do you decide when it's okay for someone to begin an exercise program at home again? And what's the best way to monitor these patients? Ricky, could you address that?
Yeah, sure. This is my opportunity for a shameless plug about our Weill Cornell post-COVID recovery clinic, which is a clinic that we started and we joined a part of here at Weill Cornell, where we as physiatrists and sports medicine specialists, we're working very closely with intensivists, pulmonologists, physical therapists, basically in an effort to answer that question that you just asked of when is it safe to return to exercise? When do I know I'm making progress in a post-COVID recovery? The majority of patients who end up contracting COVID, about 80% will have a mild illness and recover almost fully. Then there are those that have had a more severe illness who might have been on a ventilator or had some respiratory compromise. It's those patients that we really like to keep a close eye on through this post-COVID recovery clinic. And basically the clinic is with physicians and healthcare providers to monitor respiratory status and stamina and see where you are in that recovery paradigm. When we talk about sports medicine and return to sports, the NFL is a great example. If you have a concussion, we know the algorithm of when you're allowed to return to play. With COVID, we only have 6 months of data, so we're still changing that model and algorithm as every week goes by. But again, there's no hard and fast rule here, but the rule is about breathing, and monitoring your respiratory rate is a really kind of crude way to determine if you are ready to go to the next step of activity. The normal respiratory rate is between 14 and 18, something like that. And if your respiratory rate, which is something you can measure with your chest expanding and lowering, if your respiratory rate is above that in the 20s, you're probably not ready to proceed to the next level of exertion. And if your resting respiratory rate is in the 30s, that's probably an indication to seek some medical care, because that's high. You're putting a lot of stress on your heart and your lungs, so you might not be ready to exercise. But my recommendation for any patient that we saw when we were on the front lines and through discharge from rehabilitation, check in with the post-COVID recovery program that allows us to monitor when you're ready to participate in exercise. And then when you return back to, quote unquote, normal. In this condition, we see patients have symptoms for 2 to 3 months so far. Again, most of the patients recover by 4 to 6 weeks, but it's not surprising when patients have lingering stamina issues. So respiratory rate and overall well-being, if you're feeling well, are 2 indications of when you're ready to proceed to the next level.
Thank you. I think one of the questions that comes up a lot is, do I need to come in to see a doctor, in person? Or if they had an injury, do I need to come get physical therapy in person? What is the appropriate role for telemedicine? Can you do this at home, both in terms of COVID recovery, but also if you're having a musculoskeletal issue, an injury? How much do you really, can you do remotely, both in terms of diagnosis and also in terms of physical therapy?
I think this pandemic has really made us be somewhat creative in the way that we are diagnosing and evaluating patients. So within our department of physical medicine rehabilitation, we are part of multiple papers on telemedicine that talk about how to perform a physical exam remotely. Certainly, it's not the same as a hands-on approach. Being able to test muscles and reflexes and a neurologic exam, it's very difficult to do that remotely, but crudely, we can assess if someone has deteriorating neurologic function through a virtual setting such as this. So for the most part, we can evaluate patients through Zoom, and that's the mode that we use here at Weill Cornell. When it comes to physical therapy, we've been very successful in providing remote physical therapy services. The manual component of physical therapy is very important to make sure patients obtain the proper posture and form when doing exercises. But even having someone watch you can provide some feedback. In May, we would have said everything is remote, right? We didn't have clinics open. Physical therapy was still remote. But when we kind of opened at the end of May, beginning of June, physical therapy has also opened in person. We have also opened in person for in-person evaluations. And we've done a very nice job of maintaining safety in our clinics. We have social distance. We have eliminated the waiting room for the most part, capped our capacity in clinic. So there's not much overflow and patients running into each other. And I think for the most part, patients are feeling a very safe environment when they come see us in our clinics. When it comes to injury, you might pick up your grandkid and hurt your back. You might move some furniture. Most of the time, these injuries are going to recover. And for younger people, it might take a couple of days. For older or elder adults, it might take a week or 2 weeks. For the most part, if you are getting better and symptoms are going down, you could probably manage this at home. If you do experience a sudden onset of weakness or dizziness or bowel or bladder loss, or your pain intensifies, those are probably reasons to either see us in person or get one of these virtual evaluations. But for the most part, patients can do fine monitoring these symptoms at home.
That's great. I think that, with all the time people are spending at home, it's easy to not know what to do. You don't know if it's safe to go out, to come to the doctor. Sometimes you feel like it's too trivial. Sometimes you're worried you're waiting too long. And I think it's reassuring to know that there are options to get evaluated, first of all, remotely, so you don't have to sort of make that decision. And then that actions have been taken to make it safe so that when you do come in person, you really feel like you're doing something that is not, hazardous to your health by seeing the doctor. So that's really good news. And I thank you for sharing that. I have to say that's been my, personal impression as well, that I sometimes feel safer at work than I do in the grocery store.
Right.
Just because all the protocols are being followed and people know what to do. And that's really reassuring to me. So I think we're going to, we have about 20 minutes left. So I think we're going to switch over to questions and answers at this point. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. The chat function to the right of your screen is open now, and you can type in questions, which then I can read and pose to our panelists. So we're going to, while you're getting those questions entered, I'm going to start us off with another question for Janet, which is, when I do go to the grocery store or from shopping online, are there clues on the nutrition label that I should use when I'm getting a packaged good to decide whether this is appropriate to eat or something I should avoid?
Oh, well, the first thing I like to look at when I'm shopping is seeing certain seals, whether it's organic, pasture-raised, or grass-fed, or wild-caught. These are some, they have to pass that test before I go into more detail. Then I look at the ingredients. So want to make sure it's a short list and not a long one. I also want to make sure that you can read all the words and it's pronounceable. There are a lot of chemicals and preservatives that they pump into more refined products. So you definitely want to be sure to not buy refined, but if you do, make sure you don't, run into MSG or aluminum or, high fructose corn syrup. Those kind of, chemicals are not good for you. Then I look at the protein and fiber. You want to make sure they do have nutrients in them. So fiber, at least 3 grams, higher is ideal, but 3 is at minimum. Then I go to the carbohydrate section. Is it about 45 grams? And how much of that is added sugar? So based on the daily value, 5% is considered low and 20% high. So it's a good reference range to use. I also look at fat. So you want to make sure that whatever you're purchasing doesn't have any trans fat for sure. Saturated, of course, needs to be at a minimum. And again, referencing the 5 and 20% as low at 5% and high at 20. So, and if you do have something high in saturated, such as coconut oil, which you use to cook, you want to use that sparingly, maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons a day.
Sounds like good advice. I appreciate it. I think it's, sometimes you go to the grocery store and really, or online these days, and it's really hard to tell which foods are better than the others. So that sounds really helpful.
Thanks, Joe.
Some people, one of the questions I'm getting from one of the participants is about the value of checking your weight daily. Some people are very inclined to do this, and others are not. I've been known to go several years before checking my weight. The problem with checking it daily is sometimes it can emotionally be a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the value of that? Is that something good, or should people avoid it, or is there some schedule that's better?
I would refrain from weighing yourself, especially on a daily basis. I think it doesn't do any good for the mood or mental health, especially if you're really thinking so much about your weight fluctuating. What I would do for a better measure is either once a week or once a month. But even better than that, I would say, how do you feel in your clothes? If you feel like you're eating well, being active, and that would loosen up the way your pants fit, for example, your shirt, feels. And that's a better measurement, in my opinion, to evaluate weight, so to speak.
To go along with that, we had a conversation with one of our endocrinologists here who works in the Obesity and Weight Management Center. And their recommendation was, body mass index, BMI, and weight aren't really great indicators of fitness. And the example that we talked about was when Arnold Schwarzenegger was in his prime, his body mass index actually put him into the obese category, which is obviously unrealistic. And weight fluctuates. Water retention, by eating salts one day can go down. I love the analysis of kind of feeling how your clothes fit. I think that's a much better indicator than just the number on the scale. But Janet, you tell me something about my plate and how I can teach my daughter something. I think she thinks the 2 food groups are peanut butter jelly and pasta. So I do have some work to do when I go home and teaching her about half the plate being vegetables. So I do appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Many people think of exercise as being something that you do in a session. I've finished my meetings for the day, and now I'm going to exercise for an hour because that's what that's sort of been told. Is it okay to do it in smaller bits? If you have 20 minutes between meetings in the middle of the day, and then later on you have another 10 minutes, is that okay as well? Does it matter? Is it better maybe to break it up?
Yeah, great question. Based on the recommendations from the American Heart Association, doing it in small bouts throughout the week maintains or develops better fitness routine. And that way you're on a schedule. If you do 150 minutes a week, once a week, you're not going to affect your basal metabolic rate, which is something that we didn't really talk about today. And that's kind of the indicator of fitness and maybe even weight if someone who likes to try to weigh themselves periodically. So I like the idea of small bouts of exercises in between activities. What that does is not only burns calories during the activity, but there's a phenomenon after exercise called excess post-oxygen consumption, post-exercise, kind of the afterburn. So if you do a little exercise and you burn calories the rest of the day, then do exercise again, I think that's more palpable anyway. Finding 150 minutes at one stretch these days, I don't have that time. If someone in the audience does, that's great. But 20 minutes 7 days a week, I think we owe it to ourselves to invest in our bodies and our fitness to do that.
That's great. Thank you. It's certainly, I think, a realistic strategy sometimes when your days are packed and your time free is in bits and pieces. Janet, I'm wondering if we could get a little more granular in terms of some of the snack suggestions. So can we, for example, is it okay to eat nuts? Are those all right? What about hummus? What about yogurt? Get us a little more specific if you could.
Sure. I usually like to say within like a 5-hour period, a snack could be a trail mix. It could be a healthy bar. It could be a fruit and nut butter. It could be a fruit cocktail, about maybe 6 to 8 ounces. It could be a small yogurt parfait. So that's all, great. And I also mentioned those great energy bites if you haven't tried it. They really help to feel nourished. For a longer gap between meals, I mentioned a more substantial snack where maybe, the nuts wouldn't cut it. So at that point, open face sandwich makes more sense. For example, if you layer it, one slice of whole grain plus a hummus or avocado, plus add in, it could be a protein like chicken or fish, and then add in about a cup and a half of vegetables, drizzle a little vinaigrette. That's a more nourishing, substantial snack within a 7-hour period. It could be also like a yogurt parfait that I mentioned, or hot cereal, or overnight oats, which with layers, with chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds. You want it to be thick as well so that it has texture. And then you can add in like fresh fruit and chopped nuts and coconut shreds. And that's a little bit more of a substantial snack within a larger gap between meals.
That's great. I think it's really helpful to have some sort of concrete suggestions there. Are there things in particular that, just to follow up on that we should really try and stay away from? And I'm afraid you're about to tell me everything I do is wrong, but for example, pastries, baked goods, some things seem obvious. Candy seems like it's probably not a good idea, but could you sort of say what's a little bit on the no-no list?
So I don't like to say no, right? Because I think we all enjoy our treats. And I think, again, it's important to honor the quality of life. What I've defined is as those candies that you mentioned are treats and not snacks. So with that said, I think it makes more sense to have your treats maybe more likely after a meal, where you're less likely to have more than 1 or 2 Oreo cookies, for example. Whereas if you had it in its own designated snack period within 5 to 7 hour gap, you might likely have more. So, to prevent that, if once you're satisfied with a meal, then your dessert or treat could be something like a pastry where you've left a little bit room to enjoy that.
I like that distinction between snacks and treats. I think that helps me conceptualize this a bit. I worry that maybe too many of my snacks might be treats, but I'll work on them.
Excellent.
Question for Ricky about exercising as we get older. So 2 questions. One is, some people, we had a question from the participants about it's harder to recover from strenuous exercise. It takes longer, and it feels like it's more difficult. And I also worry as the weather starts getting cooler, and soon there'll be snow outside, and people are worried about falls both inside and outside the home. Suggestions for our older members of our audience?
Yeah, great question. This is something that I field on a daily basis with my patients. So to answer the first question about recovery, I give this example a lot with my daughter. She's 4 years old, and when she cuts her knee or falls and scrapes her leg, she'll bleed, and she will recover by the evening. Within 12 hours, that cut is gone. Whereas someone who's in their 50s or 60s might cut themselves shaving, and that scab might be there for a couple of days or even a week. And the reason for that is our ability to restore and regenerate things gets less and less efficient as we age. That's just part of the process. We used to call degenerative joint disease, degenerative spine disease. And that's like saying getting white hair is a disease. I have white hair right here, and I'm 40, so I'm not going to call it a disease, but our ability to recover gets less as we age. One of the best things that we can do to prevent that or delay the onset is to maintain muscle mass and lean muscle mass. Janet very eloquently talked about eating lean protein, and building lean muscle. And the same is true for as we age. Unfortunately, in those two big categories of aerobic and anaerobic, aerobic doesn't quite build the muscle that we need. You really need to do some resistance type of exercise, either with bands, walking, with weights, doing some stairs. And what we found goes into your second question about reducing falls. The muscles on the side of our legs, our butt muscles, our glutes, we don't really use those much unless we're doing a lot of single leg activities. So simple exercise that I tell my patients to do at home, even while you're watching a show or watching the debates, if you want, is to do sit to stand. So you're sitting on the couch without using your hands, stand up. And do that repeatedly, and that really builds the glute muscles that are your stabilizing muscles that will hopefully prevent you from falling. But practice makes perfect. The more you do, the faster you're going to start recovering. I would encourage everyone to build muscle because that's the one structure in our body we can rebuild until our last breath. So keep working on that. I try to do that myself.
That's great. Thank you, Ricky. I think that's really helpful. We have, as you know, a whole range of people in terms of age that we care for, and really important to address both the young and the older. And you mentioned something about hair, but I couldn't relate to that. So one last question, and I think we'll close. What about going to the gym? Is it safe to go to gym? Is it better to do online classes? And I know that there's not a simple answer to that, and it may depend on the circumstances. But could you address a little bit about how you would judge whether it's safe to go to your particular gym or an exercise class?
Yeah, that's a challenging time now, especially based on some of the responses that we had of the audience members' baseline activity is to go to the gym and studios and classes. And that's where they get their social experience, their camaraderie with other people. So I hate to take that away from them. That being said, if I'm going to wear my Tony Fauci hat, I'm going to say, do what's necessary. And if you can avoid being out in public, avoid being out in public. A lot of the things that we do in terms of the classes are available online. You can join even these virtual groups. I did a virtual yoga class with my wife, and we were, broadcast on TV. It's not quite the same, but it certainly makes me feel safer. That being said, there are classes that are open. There are gyms that are reopening. They're doing a nice job of limiting how many people can be in the gym at the same time. They're wiping down the equipment. Everything in life is a calculated risk. We leave our house and take the bus to get to work. It's a calculated risk. And, some things we have to do. My advice safely is if you can avoid going to the gym and do things at home, that's my recommendation. If you really need that social outlet, I don't want you to have extra stress and anxiety, and that's your release, then you have to do that too. So staying active, mobility is medicine. That's my tip.
That sounds great. Well, listen, I really want to thank our panelists for today's important and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you for all our attendees for your insightful questions and for joining us in this webinar in our series, Weill Cornell Medicine Insights. Now, I would like to turn things back over to Dean Choi for a closing message.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to both our panelists. We are fortunate to have guidance from experts like yourselves in staying healthy throughout our lives, and especially now. To all of you tuning in today, thank you. We know your time is valuable, and we're deeply grateful for all you do for Weill Cornell Medicine. If you're interested in supporting the work of Weill Cornell or any of the faculty on today's panel, there will be more information in an email you'll receive from us tomorrow. Please join us for our next webinar, The Perfect Score, COVID Testing and a Flattened Curve. Until then, please stay safe and well.